Tonight, in the damp wooden shed of an 1880s LUBECK rope tar sign painter, you stand beside the long bench while rain taps softly on the yardstones. There is no hurry here, only the slow smell of tar, linseed oil, wet hemp, and old pine boards settling around us. The morning has not quite opened. Beyond the small window, LUBECK is still grey, with its high brick gables blurred by mist and its narrow streets carrying the first careful wheels toward the river. You can hear them faintly, those iron rims crossing uneven stone, then fading behind warehouse walls where sailors, coopers, rope makers, and clerks begin their quiet work. Inside the shed, the air is warmer than the street, not truly warm, but held close by the stove in the corner and by the dark gloss of tar that seems to keep yesterday's heat in its black surface. You are here for a small job, one that most people pass without naming. In 1880s, LUBECK the rope tar sign painter does not build ships, nor twist the great cables, nor command a warehouse full of men. He makes the signs that tell working hands what kind of tar waits in a tub, what rope it suits, where it came from, and where it should go next. The signs are small, often odd, sometimes shaped to fit a barrel head, a beam, a shelf, or the curve of a tarred coil. Yet in a yard where rope can stiffen, rot, slip, or hold, a clear sign has its own quiet value. You notice the bench first. It is rubbed pale at the front edge, where sleeves have passed for years. Darker stains gather near the back, where brushes are laid down too heavily, and where the tar pot leaves a round shadow no scrubbing can lift. A little knife lies beside a stack of thin wooden boards. There is chalk, a ruler, a tin of lamp black, and a jar with a narrow neck holding brushes upright like reeds in black water. The bristles have dried stiff at their tips, and when you touch one, it gives a faint tack against your finger. The work begins with looking. That may sound too simple, but we can stay with it for a while. You lift each blank signboard from the stack and turn it toward the window, checking the grain, the knot, the split that may widen after one more wet winter by the Trave. Some signs will hang flat on warehouse doors. Some will be nailed to low bins where rope ends are stored. Some will be tied by cord to tar barrels, and those must not be too heavy, because a man with cold hands should be able to lift them aside without cursing his morning. In LUBECK, rope tar has a smell that follows the harbor. It comes from pine tar, from resinous wood burned slowly with little air, collected and thickened until it becomes dark, sticky, and useful. A rope treated with it can resist dampness better. It can sit through fog, salt spray, and warehouse chill with a little more patience in its fibers. You do not need to know every trade secret to understand that smell. It is smoky and sweet, sharp at first, then mellow, with something of a forest after rain, and something of a chimney that has worked all winter. The sign painter knows the grades by habit. Thin tar for dressing smaller cordage, heavier tar for the standing rigging that must bear weather, mixtures softened with oil when the cold makes everything stubborn. In the 1880s, LUBECK is a place of old brick and new habits, still carrying Hanseatic memory while steamers and rail goods change the rhythm of the quays. The signs must fit that changing world. Old hands read symbols quickly. Younger clerks want clearer letters. Foreign buyers may know enough German to read a mark, but a shape or color helps when a warehouse is dim. So you choose the board with care, a half-moon shape for the small hanging sign near the warming pot, a long narrow strip for the shelf of rope ends, a wider, arched sign for the door where barrels are kept upright on skids. The oddness is not decoration for its own sake, it is the shape of usefulness. A sign must belong to the place where it hangs, like a key belongs to its lock, like a brush belongs to the hand that has worn its handle smooth. The stove gives one soft click. Somewhere outside, a gull calls over the roofs, thin and far away. You can hear footsteps in the yard now, and the low scrape of a barrel being nudged across planks. The painter does not rush to the door. He dips a cloth in turpentine and wipes yesterday's tack from his fingers. The cloth is already brown and black, and it leaves a clean coldness on the skin before the tar smell rises again. The first sign is for a rope walk near the edge of the city, where long strands of hemp are stretched, twisted, walked backward into strength, and laid in coils that look sleepy until a ship needs them. You write the words slowly, Not because they are difficult, but because thick paint carries its own pace. The brush presses down, widens, lifts and narrows. Each letter must be plain enough for a tired man at dusk, with rain on his cap and tar on his cuffs. The painter has learned that beauty in such work comes from being read without effort. There is a small satisfaction in the first stroke. Black paint settles into the grain, and the board seems to accept its name. You steady your wrist on the bench and let the letters grow. Not too thin, not too proud. A sign in a tar shed should not look like a shop window on a bright street. It should look sturdy, patient, and ready to be touched by rough hands. When the brush drags slightly, you add a little oil and stir until the paint loosens with a soft, wet sound. By the time the first sign is drying near the stove, the yard has become fully awake. You hear a rope maker speaking through the wall, his voice low and practical, followed by the dry shuffle of hemp across boards. There is no sharp music in it, only the common tune of work beginning. A bucket is set down, a hinge complains, a cart passes slowly beyond the gate. In the middle of it all, the signs wait, light, flat, and quiet, each one meant to prevent a small confusion later in the day. Now we move with the painter into the tar room, where the light is lower and the smell is deeper. This room in 1880s LUBECK has brick underfoot, a low ceiling, and shelves darkened by years of handling. Barrels stand along one wall, some marked by burned stamps, some by chalk that has smeared in the damp. You feel the air thicken as you step inside. It clings to wool, skin, beard and sleeve. The place is not dirty in a careless way. It is simply a room where tar has always been stronger than soap. The painter carries a measuring stick and a little notebook. He does not paint yet. First he listens to what the room needs. A barrel near the door has lost its tag. Another has a mark too faded to trust. A shelf sign hangs crooked from one nail, and the nail has rusted almost through. On a beam above the warming kettle, an old sign still says, "Ship rope tar," though everyone knows that mixture is now kept 2 shelves lower. These are small errors, but small errors are exactly what signs are made to soften. You stand close enough to see the barrel heads. They are not smooth circles. They are made from fitted staves, tightened by hoops, scarred by travel, and darkened where tar has leaked and been wiped away. A square sign would sit strangely on some of them. It would catch sleeves and crack at the corners. So the painter makes a round-edged plaque, a small wooden face that follows the barrel's shape and hangs by 2 holes bored near the top. It fits the curve without pretending the barrel is neat. This is where the odd signs of LUBECK earn their quiet name. Some are shaped like shields, because they hang between beams. Some are clipped at one corner to avoid a latch. Some have a sloping top, so water will run away if they hang outdoors by the yard gate. A few are painted with simple marks beside the words, a coil for rope, a drop for tar, a little crossbar for a mixture that must be warmed before use. They are not art in the gallery sense. They are art in the hand sense, art that keeps a room from arguing with itself. The painter kneels beside the barrel and rubs the wood with a dry rag. Dust lifts, then settles. The surface smells faintly of old pine, old tar, and cold metal hoops. You can feel the chill of the floor through your knees if you stay there long enough. He places the shaped blank against the barrel, adjusts it, frowns gently, and takes a shaving from the edge with his knife. One thin curl falls away. Now the sign rests cleanly, with no rocking. There is patience in that little shaving. No one on the quay will praise it. No clerk will write it down. But a sign that truly fits will hang longer, swing less, and stay readable through many damp mornings. You begin to understand the pride of such work. It is not loud pride. It is the quiet feeling that the world has one less snag in it, because your hand took a moment more. The wording matters too. The painter chooses phrases that working people already use. If a rope maker calls one blend black winter tar, the sign should not call it by a grander name unless a ledger demands it. If the clerks need a number, the number is written in words on the back, because everything spoken here travels better by mouth than by paper alone. In the front room, a boy may learn the signs before he learns the ledgers. He will know which tub smells sharper, which one pours slower, and which one leaves the rope shining like wet coal. A little later, the painter warms a small pot of paint near the stove. The room quiets around that gesture. Cold paint is stubborn, warm paint flows with less dragging, and the letters settle more evenly into the wood. You watch the brush go in, pause, and rise with a bead gathering at the tip. He turns it against the pot's edge, not too hard, just enough to remove the excess. There is a small discipline in that, because too much paint makes a letter swell, and too little leaves it pale. The sign receives its first word. It is slow work, almost breathing work. Downstroke, curve, lift. A narrow pause. The painter's fingers are stained around the nails, and the stain will not leave tonight. His cuff is shiny where tar has rubbed into the wool. He smells of smoke, oil, and weather. If you stand beside him long enough, you begin to share that smell too, and it becomes less like a thing in the room, and more like the room's own voice. As the morning wears on, the painter leaves the tar room and returns to the bench, where daylight has strengthened, and the drying signs lean in patient rows. The Lubeck yard is louder now, but still gentle from where we stand. Work sounds arrive softened by walls and mist. A hammer strikes somewhere, not quickly, just with the steady decision of a coper tightening a hoop. Rope slides over a peg with a fibrous sigh. Boots pass the doorway and carry grit across the boards. You prepare the next signs for the outer gate. These must be readable in dull weather. They must survive rain, salt air, and the careless brush of carts. The painter selects heavier boards, not wide, but thick enough to take nails without splitting. He sands the edges with a worn scrap of sharkskin or coarse paper, depending on what the shop has bought that month. The motion is small and repetitive. Your palm feels the vibration. Fine dust gathers near the wrist and sticks where the skin is still faintly oily. These gate signs are for delivery men who may not step into the tar room at all. One points toward the rope tar store. Another marks the place where empty barrels should be left. A third, narrow and slightly crooked by design, fits along a post between two iron straps. It would look odd on a clean table. On the post, it will look inevitable. The painter has already measured the space twice, once with a stick and once with his eye, which is the measurement he trusts most. Lubeck in the 1880s is full of such fitted things. Warehouses lean into narrow lots. Doors open against old stone. Beams are reused, patched, blackened, and named by habit. A person who works here learns to make straight work for crooked places. You do not fight the old city, you listen to it. The sign painter listens with his hands, feeling where a board should be trimmed, where a hole should be bored, and where a letter should sit so it will not vanish behind a latch. There is a quiet lesson in that. The world rarely offers a perfect square space for our neat intentions. More often, it gives us a damp post, a rusted hinge, a barrel that swells in winter, and a task that still needs doing before noon. So we shape the sign a little. We soften the corner. We move the word left by a finger's width. Then the thing fits, and the day can continue. At midday, the painter eats near the doorway, where the air is less heavy, and the yard gives a view of passing life. His bread is dark and dense. There may be cheese wrapped in cloth, an onion, and coffee gone lukewarm in a tin cup. You sit with him in the pause, feeling the bench under your legs, and the dampness in your coat begin to ease. The smell of tar never leaves, but outside air threads through it, carrying the river, horse sweat, wet rope, and coal smoke from a steamer shifting at the quay. Men pass without ceremony. A clerk nods. A rope maker lifts 2 fingers in greeting, then disappears into the long building where strands are laid. Someone laughs softly, not at anything grand, only at a comment made while carrying a bucket. The painter does not need to join every conversation. His work is social, in a quieter way. The signs he makes will speak for him later, when his hands are elsewhere, and someone needs to know where to set a barrel down. After the meal, you return to the bench with slower hands. Afternoon has a different weight. The light lies flatter across the boards, showing every raised grain and every place where paint has thickened at an edge. The painter checks the morning's signs by touch, hovering fingers just above the letters before risking contact. A dry surface feels different even before it is touched. It loses its wet shine, and gives back the light more softly. You learn to see that, then to trust it. One sign needs a second coat. The first letters have sunk into the wood more than expected. Another needs its lower edge scraped where a drip formed and hardened like a tiny black tear. The painter takes the knife and shaves the floor away. No annoyance, no drama. These small corrections belong to the work as much as the first stroke does. A sign that will hang for months, perhaps years, deserves one more pass of the eye. The afternoon task is lettering for a batch of small hanging tags. These are no bigger than a hand, with holes at one end for twine. They will travel with coils of rope after tar dressing, telling a buyer or foreman what was used and when. In an age before neat printed labels reached every corner of work, such hand signs carry a human steadiness. Each one is a small promise that someone noticed, sorted, marked, and cared enough to make the next person's task easier. You hold a tag by its edge and feel how light it is. The wood is thin, almost delicate, but not precious. It smells less of pine now and more of the room, because the room has entered everything. The painter uses a smaller brush for these. His wrist barely moves. The letters are compact but never cramped. A poor sign wastes space by shouting. A good one uses just enough room to be understood. The words repeat, and repetition settles the mind. Rope tar, fine cord, warm before use, north store, returned barrel. Every phrase belongs to a practical need. Yet as the brush moves from tag to tag, the phrases become almost like a soft chant under the day's ordinary sounds. You may find your breathing slowing with the strokes. The painter's hand travels, pauses, dips, returns. Outside, the wheels pass. Inside, black letters gather on pale wood. By now your hands know where things are. The chalk lies to the left. The rag is folded near the paint pot. The knife rests with its blade turned safely inward. You do not need to look for each tool, because the bench has become a little map of habit. That is one of the comforts of steady work. The world may be broad and uncertain beyond the gate, but here, for a while, the brush returns to the jar, the sign returns to the rack, and the next blank board waits where it should. As the light through the high windows shifts, the work turns from making signs to placing them, and we follow the painter back into the yard. The air outside feels cooler after the thick room, and the stones underfoot shine in places where the mist has not lifted. A ladder leans against the wall near the tar store. It is wooden, a little polished at the rungs by many hands, and when you lift it, it has the honest awkwardness of something built to be useful, not graceful. The first sign goes beside the store door. The painter holds it in place, steps back, adjusts, and holds it again. This is not fussiness. This is how a sign becomes part of a building. Too high, and a man with a load will miss it. Too low, and a cart may scrape it. Too close to the hinge, and the open door will hide it. A good sign sits where the eye already wants to go. You pass him the nails. They are cold in your palm, square cut and slightly rough. He sets one against the board, and taps lightly at first, just enough to bite the wood. The hammer sound is small against the yard's open air. Tap, tap, then a firmer stroke. The board settles. The second nail follows. When he lets go, the sign remains as if it had been waiting there all along. That is the meaning of a sign that truly fits. It does not call attention to its own cleverness. It simply belongs. In 1880s LUBECK, where old brick meets wet rope and tar barrels arrive with marks from other ports, belonging is a practical virtue. The fitted sign saves a question. It spares a misplaced barrel. It keeps the day moving in its quiet channel, like water finding the familiar path between stones. The next sign is stranger. It has a notch cut from one side, because the beam where it must hang has an iron bracket that no one plans to move. The notch makes the sign look unfinished on the bench. On the beam it closes neatly around the obstacle. You can imagine a visitor wondering why it was made that way, and a worker not wondering at all. To the person who uses it, the shape is obvious. It was made for here. The painter climbs 2 rungs of the ladder and takes the sign from your hands. His coat pulls at the shoulder. A bit of sawdust clings to his sleeve. He works slowly, because rushing with a hammer above your head brings no benefit. The nail enters the beam with a duller sound than before. Old wood answers differently from new wood. It has density, memory, and hidden knots. The painter feels each strike through the handle. When the sign is fixed, he wipes its face with the heel of his hand, though nothing is on it. The gesture is almost affectionate. We all do this, in one way or another, with work we have finished. We smooth the cloth, square the paper, align the cup on the shelf. It is the body's way of saying, "There, that is enough." The painter climbs down, and for a moment both of you stand looking at the little notched board, black letters clear in the dim. More signs follow through the afternoon. One by the barrel rack, one near the warming kettle, one low on a door where the old chalk marks have finally become too blurred. Each placement changes the room slightly, not grandly. Nothing announces itself, but the tar store becomes easier to read, the way a familiar face becomes clearer when a lamp is moved nearer. The workers will notice without stopping. Their hands will reach, carry, pour, and set down with fewer pauses. The painter keeps the removed signs in a crate. He does not throw them out immediately. Some wood can be planed down and used again. Some letters can be painted over. A sign that no longer fits one shelf may fit another after trimming. In a working yard, even mistakes and old names are given a chance to become useful once more. You lift one from the crate and see 3 older words beneath the current paint, faint as shadows under ice. There is history in those layers. A changed supplier, a moved barrel, a mixture no longer used. The signs remember small adjustments that ledgers may not bother to explain. Lubeck's larger history is written in charters, trade, churches, ships, and city gates. But this smaller history is written in nail holes, scraped paint, and boards cut to fit around things that were already there. It is not less real because it is quiet. It may be easier to touch. When evening nears, the yard begins to loosen. The work is not over, but its edge softens. Voices lower. A cart leaves with empty barrels knocking gently against one another. The rope walk door opens, and warm fibrous air drifts out, carrying hemp dust and the tired smell of bodies at the end of a shift. You stand near the tar store and look at the new signs in their places. They do not shine now. They have settled into the grey light. The painter returns to the bench for the last part of the day, cleaning and setting things ready for morning. This too is part of the job, and perhaps the most soothing part to watch. Brushes are worked in oil, then wiped. The knife is cleaned along its spine. Paint pots are covered. The unused boards are stacked flat, with heavier pieces below and thin tags on top. A damp rag is hung where air can reach it. Nothing is hurried, because a hurried closing makes a harder morning. Your hands feel the day's residue. There is grit at the fingertips, oil near the thumb, and a faint stickiness that catches when you rub finger against finger. The painter has long ago stopped minding such things. He knows which stains will wash off and which will remain until they fade by themselves. The smell of tar will follow him home through the streets, into the stairwell, perhaps even to the table where supper waits. It is not unpleasant to those who know his trade. It is simply the mark of where he has been. Outside the window, Lubeck's brickwork darkens toward evening. The high roofs and stepped gables hold the last pale light. Somewhere a bell sounds with a mellow distance, not loud enough to command, only enough to mark that the day has turned. The painter checks the drying rack once more. The signs for tomorrow are there, each tilted slightly back, each carrying words that will soon belong to a room, a door, a barrel, or a beam. You may notice, as we stay here quietly, that the work has changed the way the yard feels in memory. At first, there was only tar, wood, rain, and the dimness of a northern morning. Now there are places for everything. The rope tar store has its name. The barrel rack knows it's returning empties. The warming kettle has its caution. The small tags wait to travel with coils into other hands. Nothing has become grand, and that is part of the peace of it. The painter does not need a final flourish. He does not stand back like a man unveiling a painting. He closes the pot, folds the cloth, and rests both hands on the bench for a breath. The day has been made of small fittings, board to barrel, word to use, notch to bracket, nail to beam, hand to tool. In such work, a person can feel the shape of a life that is modest and complete for the length of one day. the stove settles lower. Its warmth thins, though the room still holds enough of it to soften the chill near the floor. You hear one last cart beyond the wall, moving away toward the street, and then the yard becomes mostly footsteps, hinges, and the low murmur of men finishing what they began. The signs remain where they were placed, ready for darkness, ready for morning, ready to be read without ceremony. And now, as evening gathers over the tar room, we stay with the bench a little longer, where the brushes stand clean enough for sleep and the odd little Lubeck signs rest in their proper places. The lamp is not yet lit, but the room has begun to ask for it, in the quiet way rooms do when corners lose their edges. You can still see the outlines of the boards, the curve of the brush handles, and the dull skin forming on the little pot of black paint. The painter waits a moment longer, because good daylight, even fading daylight, shows the truth of a line better than flame. Then he strikes a match, cups it from the draught, and brings the lamp awake with a small amber bloom. In that new light, the signs change again. The ones near the stove shine along their letter strokes, while the dry ones look flatter, more settled, and more ready for use. You may notice how the tar-dark room softens under lamplight, how rough boards turn honey-colored at their edges, and how the window gives back only a faint copy of the bench. Outside, Lubeck is moving towards supper and evening bells, but inside the rope tar shed, the work narrows to what can be held in two hands. The painter takes one small tag from the drying rack and turns it carefully, checking the back for splinters. A sign can be clear on the front and still fail the hand on the back if it catches a glove or draws blood from a thumb already cracked by cold. He sands it lightly, with the patience of someone who has learned that unseen surfaces matter. You hold the lamp a little closer, and the tag gives off a dry wooden smell beneath the heavier tar scent. The little board becomes smoother under his fingers, almost warm from touch. There are signs meant to be seen by many people, and there are signs meant mostly to be felt by one person in a hurry. This one will hang from a rope coil in the north store, where the air is colder and the window is often filmed with damp. A worker may reach for it before dawn, brushing past other coils, and his fingers will find the edge before his eyes find the words. That is why the corners are softened. That is why the hole is not too close to the end. A little twine needs a little strength around it. The painter takes a hand drill from a peg above the bench. Its wooden knob is polished by use, and its metal bit carries a faint smell of iron. He sets the tag flat against a scrap board, places the bit, and turns with steady pressure. The sound is small and papery at first, then deeper as the bit enters the backing wood. A pale curl rises, another follows. When he lifts the drill, the hole is clean enough, and he rubs its rim with his thumb to check for roughness. We can stay with that motion for a while, because it belongs to the heart of the job. The sign painter of 1880s LUBECK is not only a letterer, he is a fitter, a measurer, a quiet negotiator between object and place. Paint alone would not be enough. Words alone would not be enough. A sign must survive weather, rough handling, low light, and the strange forgetfulness that enters every busy yard when too many tasks arrive at once. The next set of signs is not for the tar room, but for the covered passage between the rope walk and the store. That passage is long, narrow, and full of drafts, with a brick wall on one side and a timber frame on the other. In wet weather, men carry dressed rope through it, and drops of tar fall where their boots already track mud. The painter has noticed, as workers do notice, that several old signs there hang too high. They are clean because no one sees them, which is not the same as being useful. So tomorrow he will lower them. Tonight he prepares the replacements. You see him mark the boards with chalk, not with fine cabinet maker precision, but with the practical accuracy of a man who knows where the nail must go. The chalk leaves a pale blue-white trail. It squeaks faintly when the grain resists. He writes guide marks for himself, little ghost lines that will vanish beneath the paint, or be wiped away before the sign leaves the bench. They are private marks, the scaffolding of a clear message. One board is longer than the rest. It will say that freshly tarred rope is to be hung clear, not laid across the lower rails where grit can cling to it. The instruction is plain, but the sign must be gentle in its authority. In a yard like this, a sign that scolds is ignored unless a master stands beneath it. A sign that fits the work is obeyed almost without thought. It sits where the hand is already moving. It says what the worker already half remembers. It completes the rhythm instead of interrupting it. The painter lays out the long board and mixes a little more white into a pot for a pale ground. Black letters on raw wood can disappear in a dim passage, especially after smoke and handling darken the surface. A light ground will help, though it must not be so bright that it looks foolish among tar barrels and rope dust. He stirs slowly. The paint thickens and folds around the stick, cream and gray blending into a color like old linen. You can smell oil more strongly now, soft and nutty under the resinous air. He brushes the ground coat across the board in long strokes. The bristles leave lines that level slowly, and a few dark flecks from the wood rise through before sinking back. You watch him work from one end to the other, always keeping a wet edge, never trapping ridges where the brush turns. Such skills are learned by repetition, not by announcement. After enough signs, the hand knows how much paint a board will take. After enough winters, the eye knows which boards will warp if painted only on one side. When the ground coat is done, he props the sign against two small blocks, so the wet lower edge touches nothing. The lamplight makes the pale board glow in the tar-dark room. It looks almost clean enough for a kitchen shelf, though by tomorrow it will belong to a passage where boots scrape and wet rope brushes past. That is another quiet truth of the work. New things are made with care, not because they will remain untouched, but because they are about to join the worn world and should begin with dignity. And as the evening settles deeper, we follow the painter through the shed once more, not to make new signs now, but to read the older ones as he reads them. The old Lubeck rope tar signs are not uniform. Some lean. Some have letters fattened by many coats. Some were made by another hand years ago. A hand with a narrower brush and a habit of curling the last stroke. You can see that difference if you stand close. The painter sees it immediately, the way a musician hears an old tune played by a different finger. One sign near the rear shelf has been painted over at least twice. Beneath the present words, dark ridges show where earlier letters still rise under the newer surface. The current label names a tar mixture for heavy mooring lines, but the older shape below suggests a shorter word, perhaps for a supplier or a former storage place. The painter runs his thumb across it. The ridges are like buried writing under cloth. No one needs to recover the lost words tonight, but their presence makes the sign feel lived in. You may find this comforting. Not everything useful is new. Not everything old must be thrown away the moment it no longer names the present exactly. In the rope tar shed, a board may carry a past job beneath a present one, and still serve well enough. The painter respects that. He does not scrape old signs clean unless the surface demands it. He lets the older paint remain where it can, because every layer has already survived smoke, damp, winter fingers, and the brush of working sleeves. The old signs also teach him what fails: a thin board split beside a nail. A painted word faded where afternoon sun reached through a high pane. A tag hung by a hole too close to its edge and broke when a man pulled it free with frozen hands. These are not grand failures. They are small lessons, and small lessons are the ones a careful trade keeps. You stand beside him while he makes a note in his book, a few words written with a blunt pencil, enough to remind tomorrow's hand what tonight's eye has learned. The notebook smells faintly of dust and coat pocket. Its pages are soft at the corners, marked with sizes, names, and quick sketches of posts or shelves. Some sketches look almost amusing, because a crooked beam drawn quickly becomes an odd little shape on paper. Yet each drawing means the painter went somewhere, looked closely, and brought the shape back to the bench. This is how a sign truly fits. It begins by respecting the place before making a mark for it. Outside, rain begins again, lightly at first. It touches the roof in scattered taps, then gathers into a steadier hush. The sound makes the shed feel smaller and kinder. You can imagine the wet sheen returning to the yard stones, the dark hoops of barrels shining, the ropes under cover breathing in the damp. The painter listens without looking up. Rain is part of the schedule here. It changes drying time, thickens the cold, and reminds every rope maker why tar matters in the first place. He checks the stove and adds one small piece of wood. The flame stirs, then settles. Heat moves slowly through the room, touching the underside of the bench, the rack of drying boards, the toes of your boots. The smell of smoke joins the tar again, and the blend is almost sweet. In such air, the mind does not need to leap far. It can rest on the next practical thing, the next brush to clean, the next tag to turn, the next sign that will be ready by morning. The painter now prepares a dark ground for signs that will hang outdoors. These need a different face. Pale paint shows grime too quickly near the gate, where carts splash and sleeves brush past. A dark ground with light letters can endure better if the letters are thick and well set. He opens a tin of lamp black, and the powder inside looks softer than soot, deeper than ordinary dust. He does not breathe over it. He moves carefully, because fine black powder travels where it likes and settles on everything. You watch him mix it with oil until it becomes a smooth black paste. The first stir is dry and resistant. Then the oil gathers the powder, and the mixture turns glossy, like night seen in a shallow dish. He adds a little resin varnish for weathering, not enough to make the sign too shiny, just enough to help rain bead and slide. The smell sharpens. It catches at the nose, then softens behind the familiar tar. He knows this smell well, and he gives the pot a few more slow turns. The boards for outdoor signs have already been primed. He paints their faces black, but not hurriedly, because black shows careless ridges as readily as white shows stains. Each stroke follows the grain, and each corner receives attention. A neglected corner lets water in. Water swells wood, lifts paint, and loosens the very words meant to guide the yard. So the painter tips the board and brushes the edge, watching the wet line darken. The work is plain, but it has consequences. By now, the lamp is the room's true sun. Its light trembles slightly when a draft moves under the door, and the shadows of the brush handles shift on the wall. You may feel the hour in your shoulders. The day has become long without becoming harsh. That is the nature of careful work. It does not strike the body all at once. It gathers in the wrist, the neck, the eyes, and the knees, until rest begins to seem not like escape, but like the next honest task. The painter straightens and rolls one shoulder under his coat. Then he sets the blackened boards aside and closes the lampblack tin. The lid fits tightly, and he presses around its rim with both thumbs. Small acts keep a shop usable. A loose lid means powder on the shelf. A wet brush left upright with paint in its belly means a ruined point. A board leaned carelessly against the stove means a blistered face by morning. The shop is kept by hundreds of such little decisions, and when the rain steadies on the roof, the painter pauses to sharpen his pencil, because tomorrow's work has already started to form in his mind. He trims the wood with a knife, turning the pencil over the shavings box. The graphite point appears slowly. It is not a fine writing point, but a blunt, serviceable one for marks on boards and notes in dim rooms. He tests it against the notebook margin. The line is grey, soft, and visible enough. Then he writes the measurements for the gatepost sign. There is something restful about measurements when they belong to real objects. A width from one iron strap to another, a height between a latch and a nail scar. The space left when a barrel stands beside a wall. These are not abstract numbers floating without weight. They are distances you can feel in the reach of an arm and the span of a hand. The painter writes them down so morning will not have to trust memory alone, because memory after sleep can be a foggy harbor. In Lübeck, many trades depend on remembering shapes. The coper knows the swell of a stave. The rope maker knows how fibers behave when damp air enters the walk. The sailor knows a knot by touch. The sign painter knows whether a word will breathe on a narrow board or become crowded and sour. We stand with him at the edge of all those trades, making marks that help the others keep their order. It is a modest place to stand, and a steady one. The rain softens the outer world until the shed seems to float in its own warm pocket. You can hear water dropping from the eaves into a barrel outside, one hollow note after another. Somewhere down the lane, a horse snorts and a man speaks to it gently. The painter looks toward the sound, then returns to the bench. A working district at night is not silent. It only lowers its voice. Even after the main labor stops, there are carts to cover, fires to bank, ledgers to close, and doors to latch. He takes one completed tag and threads a short length of twine through its hole, testing how it hangs. The twine is rough, pale, and fibrous, leaving a little dust on his fingers. It creaks softly when pulled tight. He knots it without looking, then lifts the tag by the loop. The board swings once, turns, and settles with its lettering facing forward. That matters. A tag that always turns its blank back to the room is a small nuisance repeated too often. He loosens the knot, twists the cord differently, and tries again. Now it hangs properly. You see the satisfaction pass across his face, hardly more than a softening near the eyes. The sign has become ready for its little duty. It will not be admired. It will travel with a coil, darken with handling, and perhaps be replaced before another year is out. Yet tonight it has been considered fully. It has been given a readable word, a smooth edge, a clean hole, and a loop that does not betray it. That is enough. The painter makes several more loops, and you hand him the twine as he needs it. The rhythm is gentle: pull, cut, thread, knot, test. Pull, cut, thread, knot, test. Each motion carries no drama, and because of that, the mind can rest inside it. We do not have to chase every thought that passes. We can let the rain speak, let the lamp breathe, let the tar smell remain, and let the hands finish what the day has asked. As night draws closer, the painter leaves the bench and opens the door just enough to look into the yard. Cool, damp air slips in around his boots. The smell outside is wider, less concentrated, with river water, wet stone, coal smoke, and the faint sourness of horse harness. The new sign by the tar store door is visible even in the low light. Its letters hold their shape. Rain has touched the board but not troubled it. He nods once, not proudly, just registering that the thing is doing what it should. We step out with him for a moment. The yard stones are slick, and the puddles carry broken reflections of windows and beams. The rope walk is closed now, its long interior dark except for one dim lamp at the far end. Coils of rope under the covered side rest like sleeping shapes, heavy and patient. The air is cold enough to make breath visible for a few seconds. You draw your coat closer, and the painter does the same, though he seems used to this border between warmth and weather. At the tar store door, he tests the sign lightly with 2 fingers. It does not shift. Water has beaded along the top edge, then run down one side, just as the sloped cut was meant to encourage. A square sign would have held a little line of water along its top, and over time, that line would have found a way under the paint. This one sheds it. The shape is quiet, but it is thinking ahead, or rather, the painter thought ahead for it. He walks to the passage and checks where tomorrow's long sign will go. In the dimness, the old placement looks even less useful. You can barely read the board above the rail unless you already know what it says. The painter raises his hand to the better height, palm facing the timber, and imagines the new sign there. We imagine it with him, not too high, not too near the corner, clear from the wet rope that may swing by. The place is waiting. This act of imagining the finished sign before it exists is another part of the trade. It saves wood, it saves nails, it saves the irritation of standing on a ladder with a board that should have been shorter. The painter has made enough mistakes to respect this pause. Every good worker carries a private archive of errors, not as shame, but as guidance. The wrong nail, the smeared letter, the sign that caught a sleeve for 3 months before someone finally cursed it aloud. All of that teaches the next board. The rain taps on his cap brim. He turns back toward the shed, and the warm smell meets us before we cross the threshold. Inside, the room feels almost golden after the yard's grey chill. The lamp is steady, the stove is low, the signs in the rack have not moved. It is strange how a workshop can feel like a companion after only one day, once you know where the rag hangs and which floorboard gives a tired creak near the door. The painter removes his damp cap and sets it on a peg. Then he wipes the threshold where muddy water has followed us in. This is not fussiness either. Mud, tracked beneath the bench, dries into grit, and grit finds wet paint, and wet paint preserves every careless particle. A clean enough floor is part of clean enough lettering. He has no wish to polish the place into a parlor. He only keeps it fit for the work it houses. Now the last lettering of the evening begins. It is a small repair, not a new sign. and perhaps for that reason it feels especially intimate. An old board from the barrel shelf has one word worn thin where hands have lifted it aside for years. The rest of the sign remains sound. Only those letters need renewing. The painter sets it flat and cleans the surface with a careful cloth, avoiding the old paint as much as he can. The cloth comes away grey-black. Retouching requires humility. A new sign can follow the hand's present mood, but an old sign asks the hand to serve another rhythm. The painter chooses a brush close to the earlier stroke width. He studies the curve of the remaining letters, the slight lean, the pressure at the ends. Then he begins. His new paint must not shout over the old. It must enter the worn place gently, like a mended thread in a working coat. You watch the faded word become readable again without becoming new. There is comfort in repair. It admits that use leaves marks, and that marks are not failure. A sign in a rope tar shed is meant to be touched, glanced at, dampened, darkened, and depended upon. If it wears, that means it has been part of the day. The painter knows when to replace and when to mend. Tonight, this board only needed its voice restored. By morning, a worker will read it without noticing the repair, which is often the best praise a repair receives. The brush moves more slowly now. Evening has entered the painter's hand, not as carelessness, but as a softer tempo. He finishes the word, lifts the brush, and holds the sign toward the lamp. The new letters shine more than the old ones. That will settle as they dry. Time will dull them, smoke will gather, fingers will pass, and soon the repair will belong to the whole surface. The painter sets it aside with the others, and the rack seems fuller, though only one small voice has been returned. The long day might seem plain from outside. A person passing the yard would see no great event, no ship launched, no bell rung for a ceremony, no crowd gathered in the rain, yet from within the day has been rich with small accuracies. Boards chosen, edges softened, mixtures stirred, letters spaced, holes drilled, knots tested, signs placed, old paint read, new paint added. When the mind is tired, such order can be a mercy. It gives thought a narrow path and lets the body follow. We remain there while the painter cleans the last brush. He swirls it in oil, presses it gently against a rag, then draws the bristles between finger and thumb until the point returns. A spoiled brush splays like uncombed hair and makes poor letters no matter how steady the hand. So he cares for the brush as he cares for the sign. Tools are not sacred, but they are companions of repetition. If treated well, they make tomorrow less resistant. The rag grows darker, the oil in the cup turns cloudy. He sets the brush on a slant, not upright, so liquid will not creep into the ferrule and loosen what holds the bristles. Such knowledge rarely announces itself as knowledge. It lives in where a thing is placed. It lives in the angle of a drying brush, the height of a sign, the thickness of a stroke, the decision to sand the back of a tag no one will read. The shop is full of these quiet sentences. The rain begins to lighten. You hear more individual drops now, falling from the roof edge after the main shower has passed. The yard outside will smell washed, but the shed will keep its older scent. Tar does not surrender to weather. It settles into boards, wool, hair, rope fiber, and memory. Years later, someone might smell pine tar warmed in a pot and find themselves returned to a place like this, even if they have forgotten the name of the street. The painter takes the notebook again and checks tomorrow's list. Passage sign, gatepost sign, 2 barrel plaques for the winter mixture, small tags for fine cordage, a replacement for the shelf near the warming kettle. Each line is plain and each line contains a place. We can feel the coming day waiting inside those words. Not with pressure, only with shape. Morning will arrive and the bench will be here, and the boards will take their marks one by one. Before closing, he walks to the rack and separates 2 signs that were leaning too closely. If fresh paint touches fresh paint, both faces may suffer. He gives them more air, placing a narrow sliver of wood between their lower edges. Then he trims a tiny drip from one corner with the knife. The movement is precise, almost sleepy, and the blade makes a sound too small to name. A little black curl falls to the bench, joining sawdust, chalk dust, and the day's other quiet remnants. It is late enough now that the city beyond the yard has changed character. Lubeck's daytime trades are folding inward. Shops are shuttered. Warehouse doors are barred. Lamps appear in upper windows, pale and warm behind glass touched by rain. Somewhere, someone is carrying soup to a table. Somewhere, boots are being pulled off near a stove. Somewhere, a clerk is sanding ink on a page and closing a ledger with both hands. The rope tar sign painter belongs to that same evening, though his room still holds him a little longer. He lowers the lamp wick slightly. The flame becomes smaller and steadier. Shadows thicken, but the bench remains visible enough for closing. You can sense how often he has done this, the sequence of it needing almost no thought. Pot covered, brush laid, knife wiped, notebook closed, twine hung from its peg, boards checked for balance, stove banked, door latch tested. These are the final signs of the worker's day, not painted on wood, but made in movement. And as the shed quiets, we can think about the people who will meet these signs tomorrow without knowing tonight's care. A boy carrying a small coil will see the tag and choose the right shelf. A rope maker will glance at the longboard in the passage and lift the fresh tarred rope away from grit. A delivery man will read the gatepost sign in rain and leave empty barrels where they belong. A clerk will mark a note without having to ask twice. The painter's work will disappear into the ease of other hands. That kind of disappearance can be peaceful. Not every useful thing needs to stand apart. Some work is meant to become background, and background is not lesser when it holds the day together. The fitted sign lets attention return to the rope, the barrel, the path, the weather, the body's own balance under a load. It removes one small doubt. It smooths one small crossing. In a place of many repeated tasks, such smoothing is a form of care. The painter sits for a final minute on a low stool near the stove. He does not take off his apron yet. The apron lies heavy across his knees, stiff in places where old paint and tar have dried into the cloth. His hands rest open, palms upward, as if airing themselves from the day. You can see the lines darkened there, the half-moons of grime near the nails, the tiny cuts sealed by work and time. They are not delicate hands, but they have made delicate decisions all day. We sit with him in that low warmth. The stove gives a final small sound as wood shifts inside. The lamp flame makes the window glass glow. Beyond it, the yard has become a dark wash with a few pale edges. The signs outside are unreadable now, but their shapes remain, and that is enough until morning. The signs inside are sleeping in the rack, if a thing made of wood and paint can be said to sleep. They are still curing, still taking on their final surface. There is no need to hurry away from this moment. The work has entered its resting state, and so have we. In the quiet after-making, the mind can feel how much of a day is built from things that almost vanish. A smoothed corner, a better nail hole, a word placed lower, a board cut to avoid an iron bracket. The difference between annoyance and ease can be very small, and yet a whole working day may pass more gently because someone noticed it. After a while, the painter rises. The stool scrapes softly. He takes the apron over his head and hangs it from a hook, where it keeps its stiff shape for a moment before settling. The front of his shirt is marked at the cuffs, but he brushes at them anyway. Habit again. He covers the last paint pot with a square of oiled cloth and presses the cord around its neck. The cloth wrinkles under his fingers, and the smell of oil rises briefly, clean compared with the heavy tar. He opens the door and lets the cooler air in. Not wide, just enough to clear the room before he leaves. The lamp flame leans. The drying signs do not stir. Outside, the rain has stopped, and the yard holds a wet hush. Water drops from a beam at regular intervals, each drop landing in a puddle with a small round sound. You step near the threshold with him, and the night air touches your face. It smells of brick, river, smoke, and all the wet wood of the working city. Before he goes, he looks once more at the notched sign on the beam. It sits exactly where it was meant to sit. Its odd shape has stopped looking odd. This is perhaps the finest test. A truly fitted thing loses the strangeness it carried on the bench. It becomes local. It becomes obvious. The painter sees this and accepts it without a smile large enough for anyone else to notice. His satisfaction is not a display, it is simply the settling of a correct thing into its place. The door is pulled closed and the latch meets with a dull click. Inside, the lamp is still burning low because he will return in a moment to blow it out after checking the outer lock. We remain near the shed in the soft after-rain dark, listening to the yard. A rope creaks under the covered side, shifting as damp reaches it. Somewhere beyond the wall, water runs along a gutter. Farther away, the city has its evening murmur, softened by distance and wet stone. The painter crosses to the gate and touches the new outdoor sign as he passes. It is not a conscious inspection now, more like greeting a familiar object. The painted surface has begun to skin over against the damp air. It will need more time to harden. Still, it holds. The letters remain clear enough in lamplight from the office window. A man arriving early tomorrow will read them before he thinks about them, and that will be the sign doing its work. At the gate, the painter checks the chain and lock. Metal is cold in his hand. The chain leaves a dark, wet line across his palm. He loops it through and secures it, then gives the gate a small pull. The wood answers with a low complaint, but does not open. The yard is closed. Barrels, rope, tar, signs, tools, and the unglamorous order of the place are tucked into darkness until morning. We follow him back across the stones, careful where puddles hide uneven joints. He returns inside only long enough to lower the lamp. The room seems to hold its breath as he cups his hand near the chimney and blows. The flame narrows, flutters, and goes. For a few seconds the wick glows red, then dulls. The smell of extinguished lamp oil enters the air, sharp and brief. The stove keeps a faint red eye in its grate. In that last dimness, the drying signs are only shapes against deeper shadow, rows of small tasks completed and waiting. The door closes again, this time from outside. The lock turns. The painter steps into the lane, carrying the day's smells with him. Tar in the wool, smoke in the hair, oil in the cuffs, rain on the cap. His boots move carefully over the stones, because Lubeck streets can be uneven, especially in the wet dark. The city receives him without ceremony. Other workers are moving home too, each marked by a trade, each carrying some scent, or ache or dust from the place they have left. We walk with him a little way, because the job does not end the instant the shed is locked. Work follows the body. His right hand may still feel the brush handle. His eyes may still measure signs in doorways he passes. A crooked shop placard may catch his attention. A faded chalk mark near a warehouse may make him think of tomorrow's paint. When you spend your days fitting words to places, the city itself becomes a field of possible corrections, though most will never be yours to make. The lane bends toward a wider street where the brick fronts rise high and dark. Rainwater shines in the joints between stones. A cart stands under a wall, covered with canvas that sags under collected drops. A lamp burns at an upper window, and behind it someone moves slowly, perhaps setting a table, perhaps folding cloth. The painter keeps his pace steady. He is tired, but not emptied. The day has used him in the way a good trade uses a person, leaving weight in the limbs and quiet in the mind. He passes a doorway where a baker's warmth slips into the street. The smell is brief and comforting, bread and ash mingling with tar from his own coat. He may buy a small loaf if the hour allows, or he may continue home to what is already waiting. We do not need to know every room of his life. It is enough to feel how the working city layers its scents as evening deepens. Bread, damp wool, coal smoke, river mud, horse leather, pine tar, and the sour-sweet trace of beer from a tavern door. Even away from the yard, the rope tar signs remain with us, not as objects before the eye, but as a way of noticing. You start to see how much of human work depends on small messages placed well. A mark on a barrel, a hand-painted word above a shelf, a board shaped around a bracket, a tag tied to a coil. Before printed labels became cheap and common, before every container carried its factory face, there were hands like his, making information local, durable, and plain. In the 1880s, Lubeck stands between older and newer forms of order. Steam power, rail connections, commercial printing, and standardized goods are changing the movement of materials. Yet in the tar shed, the fitted sign remains necessary because real rooms are stubbornly specific. A printed label from far away does not know about the damp passage, the low beam, the swollen barrel, or the worker whose eye looks first at the left post when he enters. The local hand knows these things. That is why we linger with this trade. It is not merely quaint. It shows how care enters the practical world at the scale of a palm. A sign painter who knows rope tar knows more than letters. He knows weather, habit, storage, reach, and the temperament of materials. He knows that paint thickens in cold, that twine frays when pulled through a sharp hole, and that men carrying weight will not stop to puzzle over beautiful confusion. Clarity is kindness when the hands are full. The painter reaches his own door at last. We will not follow him too far inside, because the sleep of another household should remain private. But we can stand for a moment near the entry, where he stamps damp from his boots, and hangs his coat where the tar smell can fade a little by morning. Perhaps someone inside says his name softly. Perhaps he answers with the low voice of a tired man who has spent the day near paint and weather. The workday loosens from him, thread by thread. Back in the yard, though, the signs are still doing their slow, unseen work. Paint cures in the dark. Wood takes in and gives back moisture. Twine relaxes around fresh knots. The notched sign on the beam holds steady through the cold hours. The gate sign gathers droplets along its upper edge and sheds them one by one. The small tags in the rack grow less glossy as their letters dry. Nothing hurries. Drying is one of the gentlest industrial processes because it asks only time, air, and the patience not to touch too soon. If we return in imagination to the shed while the city sleeps, the room is almost still. The stove has gone dark. The lamp is out. The bench is a long, pale shape in the dimness. Mice may move somewhere behind a wall, though the tar smell discourages many small visitors. A drop of water slips from a coat peg into a shallow mark on the floor. The signs rest in rows, each one holding a word meant for waking hours. In darkness, the words are not readable, yet their purpose remains. The next morning will come without drama. A grey line will form at the window. The yard will stir. The painter or another worker will unlock the door, and the air inside will shift as if waking from heavy sleep. Cold will have settled into the boards overnight. The paint will be drier but not fully hardened. The first task will be to check, not to assume. A fingertip near the edge, a close look at the shine, a judgment made from experience. Touch too soon, and the surface remembers. This is one of the painter's quiet disciplines. Waiting belongs to the trade as much as brushing. A sign can look ready before it is ready. Fresh paint can deceive the eye, especially in weak morning light. So you learn to read gloss, smell, tack, and time. You learn that a board near the stove dries differently from one near the wall. You learn that damp weather lengthens the work without asking permission. The shop teaches patience, and the patient hand wastes less labor. When the painter returns, the first sound is the key in the lock. Then the door opens inward with a soft drag at the floor. Morning air enters carrying river cold, and the room-stored smells rise to meet it. You stand again beside the bench, or perhaps you feel you never quite left. The signs wait. The tools wait. The day waits in its small pieces. He hangs his coat, rubs his hands, and opens the shutter enough to give the bench a strip of pale light. He begins by checking yesterday's long passage sign. The ground coat has dried evenly. He turns the board and paints the back with a thinner coat, because one-sided paint can make wood bow as moisture moves. This is not a thing a passerby thinks about, but the painter thinks about it because he has seen boards cup-like shallow trays after careless preparation. A warped sign may still speak, but it looks neglected and catches water where it should not. Better to balance it now. The back does not need beauty, but it needs coverage. The brush moves quickly, yet not carelessly, across the grain. He sets the board aside again, face down this time on little supports that keep the wet back from sticking. Then he checks the outdoor boards painted black the night before. Their surfaces are dry enough for lettering. In the morning light, the black is not pure black. It holds brown, grey, and a slight uneven sheen, like tar seen through shallow water. White letters will go on these, though not a harsh white. He mixes the paint toward cream, because weather and soot will soften it anyway. A too bright letter may look clean for a week and foolish for a month. The painter has an eye for the future aging of things. He wants the sign to look settled after it has lived outdoors, not ruined by the first season. You watch the cream paint gather on the brush, thick enough to cover, loose enough to curve. The gatepost sign receives its words. The painter has already measured the space, so the letters can breathe. He begins near the center, after lightly marking the line, and builds outward with calm judgment. This may surprise you, if you expect writing always to begin at the left. But a sign must balance within its board. A long word can pull the eye if placed poorly. The painter sometimes marks the middle first, then lets the phrase find its place around it, the way a rope coil finds its center before settling. Each stroke is slow. Down, curve, lift, turn. The cream paint sits raised on the black ground, catching the light. A slight tremor in the hand would show, but his hand has been steadied by years of ordinary repetition, not perfect years. No working hand is perfect every day, but practiced enough to forgive itself and continue. If one edge thickens, he trims it with the brush tip. If a corner thins, he fills it while the paint is wet. The word becomes clear. You can smell coffee somewhere nearby, perhaps from a small pot in an office room or from a worker's cup set on a crate. The scent threads through tar and oil for only a moment, then fades. Morning sounds enter too. A door across the yard opens. Someone coughs. Rope fibers are shaken loose with a dry whisper. A gull calls once, closer than yesterday, then moves on toward the water. The painter keeps lettering because the sign is at its tenderest while the paint is wet and the line unfinished. The finished gate sign is set aside, and a second blackboard is brought forward. This one is shorter, with a sloped top and 2 nail holes already bored. It will hang beneath a small overhang, where rain falls at an angle during east wind. The shape looks a little like a roof, which is fitting without being decorative. Its message is simple: directing returned barrels to the side rack. In a tar yard, returned barrels matter. They hold residue, need cleaning, and should not be mistaken for full stock or fresh delivery. The painter letters the word for barrels with particular care, because that is the word a delivery man will seek first. The rest may be read second. This is another quiet art of signs. Not every word carries equal weight. The eye arrives hungry for the main thing. A good sign feeds it first, then offers the rest. The painter may not say it this way, but his brush behaves as though he knows. He gives the useful word more width, stronger strokes, a little more air. By mid-morning, the passage sign is ready for its main lettering, and we move with the painter toward that long board now resting on the bench. Its pale ground has lost the wet look. It feels smooth enough, though the grain still speaks under the paint. He marks a line with chalk and steps back, measuring the phrase with his eyes. The instruction is longer than most. It must be readable while a man is moving, but not so large that the board becomes absurd in the narrow passage. He writes slowly, and the sentence stretches along the board like a quiet hand laid over the day's repeated mistake. Fresh tarred rope to upper rail. The words are plain, and they carry no blame. They simply point the work toward a better habit. You can imagine tomorrow's worker seeing it as he lifts a coil, adjusting without resentment, because the sign feels like part of the place, not an order shouted from elsewhere. That is the effect of being fitted both in wood and in tone. The phrase dries while the painter prepares the ladder. The ladder has spent the night under cover, but its feet are still damp from yesterday. He wipes them before bringing it into the passage, because a slipping ladder would make a simple job foolishly hard. You take the hammer, nails, and the sign, holding the board by its dry edges. The passage smells different in daylight. Less tar, more damp brick, hemp dust, and the faint metallic scent of old nails in old timber. He sets the ladder where the floor is most even. Then he climbs and asks for the board. We lift it to him carefully. For a moment, he holds it against the timber without nailing, while you stand below and look from the worker's height. He shifts it down 2 fingers. Better. He shifts it left, away from a shadow cast by the beam. Better again. The sign seems to settle before the nails touch it, as if the passage has recognized its shape. The first nail enters cleanly. The second catches harder wood and needs 3 firmer strikes. The sound travels down the passage, hollow and brief. When the painter descends, both of you look at the sign from the entrance, then from the rope walk side. It reads clearly from both directions. It does not block the rail. It does not crowd the beam. Its pale face catches the available light without glowing. The message sits at the height of use, where hands and eyes naturally pass. A worker carrying hemp strands comes through and glances at it. He does not stop. He reads, shifts his load slightly, and continues. That is the first test, completed almost invisibly. The painter notices, of course. You notice because you are standing with him. The sign has entered the flow. It has begun to repay the care spent on it, not with thanks, but with one small correction made without speech. In a quiet trade, that is a good beginning. From the passage, we return to the tar room, where the winter barrel plaques are waiting to be fitted. These plaques are heavier, made for barrels that will stand near the warmer part of the store through colder months. Winter tar behaves differently. In low temperatures, it thickens, resists pouring, and asks to be warmed before dressing rope. The sign must remind workers of that, because cold mornings make everyone tempted to force things. A little warmth first saves rope, barrel, brush, and temper. The plaques are rounded along the bottom to follow the barrel head. The painter holds one against a barrel that smells strongly of pine smoke and resin. The barrel's wood is cool and slightly damp. Iron hoops press its staves together, and old tar has gathered near the lower rim in dull black ridges. He adjusts the plaque, marks 2 holes, removes it, and drills. The drill bit bites slowly, because the wood chosen for these plaques is thicker. Pale dust drops onto his boot. When he nails the plaque, he uses shorter nails than he would for a wall. They must hold the sign without piercing too deeply into the barrel head. He knows this by feel and by memory. Too long and the nail may cause trouble. Too short and the plaque will loosen with handling. Between those errors lies the right length, a small metal decision made before the hammer lifts. You hand him the nails one at a time, and he sets them in a shallow dish so none fall into the tar-dark dust. The plaque's lettering is not large, but it is clear. Winter rope tar, warm slowly. The phrase carries a whole practical process inside 2 calm instructions. Do not scorch it. Do not hurry it. Let the tar loosen with heat until it can enter the rope fibers properly. The painter is not the tar maker, but he respects the material enough to name its needs. In this way, a sign becomes a little teacher, passing along the discipline of the substance to anyone who approaches it. The second plaque needs more trimming. The barrel has swollen unevenly, perhaps from damp storage, and the board rocks against its face. The painter removes a shaving from one side, tests, removes another, and tests again. You can hear the knife whisper through the wood. The shavings curl pale against the dark floor. This fitting takes time, but the time feels restful because it is so specific. No broad worry can enter while the hand is learning the curve of a barrel. At last the plaque rests well enough. Not perfectly, because real barrels are not perfect things, but well enough to hang without strain. The painter nails it, wipes the face, and steps back. Now the 2 winter barrels carry matching signs, though each sign has been shaped slightly to its own place. Matching, but not identical. That is the quiet balance of handwork in an industrial yard before full standardization has reached every corner. Order is desired, but local difference is accepted as part of the material world. By noon, the shed has warmed from bodies, stove, and daylight. The air is thick but not oppressive. You have grown used to it again. Tar that seemed strong at dawn now feels like a steady background, and smaller smells become noticeable within it. Sawdust, coffee grounds, damp wool, a lunch wrapped in cloth, the mineral scent of wet brick. The painter washes his hands in a basin, though the water only clouds and darkens around his fingers. Some stains remain, and he expects them to. He eats with the door half open. The yard is busy now. Barrels are being shifted. Rope is being carried under cover. A clerk from a nearby office comes to ask about 2 signs for a ledger shelf. Not because the painter is a clerk, but because everyone knows he can make a small board say the right thing and fit the awkward place. The painter listens while chewing slowly, then wipes his fingers before taking the notebook. He asks where the shelf sits, how wide, how dark, and whether the labels change often. These questions matter. A permanent painted sign may not suit a shelf whose contents change every week. For that, a slotted holder or a chalked board may serve better. The painter suggests a small frame where a paper slip can be protected from handling. This is still sign work, though it uses less paint. The clerk nods, relieved to have the problem made practical. You see again how the trade is not only making boards, but understanding how information moves through hands, eyes, weather, and habit. After the clerk leaves, the painter makes a quick sketch. The ledger shelf is not strictly part of the Recutting store, but it belongs to the same yard and the same need for fit. He draws a narrow frame, a shallow groove, 2 small screws if they can be spared, or nails if not. Then he returns to his bread. Work often arrives during rest, but he does not let it swallow the pause. He finishes eating, drinks the last of his coffee, and sits for one more breath in the doorway's cool air. In the afternoon, the small tags for fine cordage take their turn. Fine cordage needs gentler handling than heavy rope. Its signs must be lighter, and the twine loops thinner, so they do not weigh oddly or snag. The painter chooses the smoothest thin boards, then cuts them to a consistent length. The saw makes a dry, even sound. Each cut leaves a pale end that he sands lightly. The tags gather in a row like little shutters waiting for their houses. He paints these with finer letters. The brush is narrow, and his hand rests on a clean scrap to avoid smudging. You watch the words appear close and clear. Fine cord, light tar dressing, south shelf. Each tag contains enough to guide, not enough to burden. A tag that says too much becomes unreadable in use. A tag that says too little fails at the moment of decision. The painter balances this without fuss, because the yard has taught him what workers need to know. A young worker comes in to fetch a coil from the north store and pauses near the bench. He watches the painter for a moment, perhaps enjoying the calm of the brush. His own sleeves are dusted with hemp fiber, and his hair carries pale flecks that catch the afternoon light. The painter asks him whether the old fine cord tags tear loose too often. The worker thinks, then says they do, especially when the coils are stacked tight. The painter nods and makes the holes slightly farther in from the end. This is how improvement enters quietly, not through a grand meeting, but through one worker mentioning a small nuisance while another worker is willing to hear it. The tag changes by the width of a fingernail. The twine holds better. The next stack of coils is less troublesome. No one calls it invention, yet the working day becomes a little smoother because the sign maker let real use correct his plan. We can feel the generosity in that, plain and practical. The painter drills the holes and tests the loops again. The tags hang better with the new placement, less likely to split, less likely to twist backward. He threads several and gives them to the young worker, who carries them away as if carrying nothing remarkable. That is fitting. Remarkable things are not required here, only useful things, made well enough to disappear into routine. The painter returns to the bench and wipes hemp dust from the wet edge of a board before it can settle into the paint. The afternoon lengthens. Light moves across the floor, climbs the opposite wall, and fades from the lower shelves. The stove is allowed to sink lower, because too much warmth now would thicken the room unnecessarily. Outside, the yard sounds slow and spread apart. A hammer here, a cart there, voices separated by longer pauses. The new signs have entered their places, and the bench is again both ending and beginning, holding finished work on one side and fresh blanks on the other. We turn next to the ledger shelf frame, because the clerk's request has stayed in the notebook and now asks for its share of the day. The painter selects narrow strips of wood, not handsome wood, but straight. He planes one edge lightly, sending thin ribbons to the floor. The plane has a low, satisfying sound, almost like heavy cloth being torn very gently. The strip becomes smoother with each pass. You can see a faint shine where the blade has leveled the fibers. This frame will hold paper slips behind a small lip, so the words can change without scraping and repainting. It is a different kind of fitting. Instead of making one fixed message, The painter makes a place where messages can come and go. In a yard moving between old practices and newer paperwork, that flexibility has value. The frame must still look like it belongs among rope, tar, and dark shelves. Too delicate, and it will break. Too crude, and the paper will curl out or tear. He cuts the strips, lays them around a backing board, and checks the opening. The paper slips used by the clerk are narrow, a little uneven, and often handled with inky fingers. The groove must be wide enough for them, but not so loose that they fall when the shelf is bumped. The painter tests with a scrap of paper from the notebook. It slides in, catches, then slides again after he shaves the lip thinner. The adjustment is small, and it changes everything. The frame is not painted immediately. First, it is assembled with tiny nails, each tapped carefully so the strip does not split. The sound is lighter than the barrel plaque nails, almost domestic. Tap, pause, tap. The painter holds the thin wood close, his fingers placed safely aside by long habit. When the frame is done, he sands the outer corners and rubs the surface with a little oil, because the ledger room is dry enough that heavy paint is not needed. The wood darkens softly. This little frame may seem outside the romance of tar and rope, but it belongs to the same world. Industrial work depends on labels as much as levers. Materials move because people can name them, sort them, and trust that the name on a shelf matches the thing beneath it. In 1880s LUBECK, some of those names are painted on boards and some written on paper, but all of them ask the same quiet question. Can the next person understand without stopping the whole day? The painter carries the frame to the office himself. We follow through a narrow doorway into a room that smells of paper, ink, coal dust, and damp coats drying near a small stove. The clerk's shelf is indeed awkward, squeezed between a window frame and a cabinet whose door swings wider than expected. A square label board would have been struck repeatedly. The narrow frame fits better. The painter holds it in place while the clerk checks from his chair. "Lower," the clerk says softly. The painter lowers it. There. He fixes it with small nails. The office sounds are different from the yard. A pen scratches, paper shifts, a chair creaks under someone trying not to interrupt. Outside the window, a cartwheel passes, muffled by mud. The painter slides a paper slip into the frame. It sits plainly, protected by the lip. The clerk reads it and nods. No one makes a speech. The shelf now has a changeable sign that fits its cramped little world, and the painter returns to the tar shed carrying the smell of ink for a few steps. By late afternoon, clouds break slightly over Lubeck, and a paler light reaches the yard. Wet brick takes on a muted red glow. Iron hoops on barrels catch small highlights. The new gate sign looks settled already, though its paint is still young. You can feel the day bending toward evening, not in a rush, but in the way workers begin finishing sequences instead of starting large new ones. The painter knows this hour. It is for repairs, checks, and modest tasks that can be completed before the lamps are needed. He gathers the old signs removed from the passage and lays them on the bench. One is too split to reuse. Another can be trimmed into small tags. A third has a good back, though its front is crowded with obsolete words. He marks the usable sections with pencil. Waste is not treated sentimentally, but neither is it welcomed. Wood has cost someone cutting, hauling, sawing, buying, and carrying. If a worn sign can become 4 small tags, then it should be allowed that second usefulness. The saw returns, and the old sign changes shape. Its former words vanish into pieces, not erased exactly, but divided beyond reading. You may feel a faint tenderness in that. The board served one purpose, and now will serve another. The painter stacks the new blanks and brushes dust from their edges. Some carry dark paint on the back from their earlier life. That does not matter. A tag's back may tell no official story, yet still carry the memory of where it hung before. He sands the cut edges until they are kind to fingers. Again and again, this kindness appears in the trade. Not softness for softness' sake, but the practical mercy of removing what would catch, tear, scratch, or confuse. A person might build a whole philosophy from such sanding, though the painter would probably laugh quietly and keep working. Still, as you stand beside him, you can feel the truth of it. Much of good work is simply taking away the small roughness that would trouble someone later. The old split sign is set aside for kindling, but not near the stove yet, because painted wood can smoke poorly and some scraps are better discarded than burned indoors. The painter knows which materials should not enter the evening fire. Tar, paint, oil and resin all have their temperaments. Useful things can become unpleasant if handled wrongly. He places the scrap in a separate crate for disposal, then wipes his hands on the rag and returns the saw to its hook. A breeze enters under the door and stirs the drying tags. They move almost imperceptibly, a slight lift and settle. The painter notices and shifts the rack away from the draft. Fresh paint gathers dust when air crosses it too freely. A quieter corner is better. He places the rack near the wall, where warmth remains but the draft cannot touch it directly. You see how often the work asks for adjustment. Not large changes, just listening, just moving a rack 2 feet to the left. The day's final new sign is for the warming kettle. The old one was too dark, and its warning had become more memory than writing. This new sign must be readable in steam and low light. The painter chooses a board with a slightly rougher face, because the paint will grip it well, and because the sign will not need fine elegance. It will hang near heat, tar, and men with impatient hands. Its message must be plain enough to interrupt haste without sounding sharp. He paints the ground in a muted ochre color made from what is available, a warm, earthy yellow that sits well in the tar room. It is not bright like fresh straw. It is closer to old clay, or a wall that has seen smoke. On this, dark letters will stand clearly. He lets the first coat dry near the stove, while he prepares the words on paper, sketching them once, then again shorter. Warm slowly. Stir before use. Keep flame low. The phrase is longer than the board comfortably allows. He studies it, then changes the arrangement. Warm slowly becomes the main line. Stir before use sits beneath it. The flame instruction is perhaps better placed on a separate small tag near the stove control, where the hand reaches. This is another kind of fitting meaning to action. The warning belongs where the action happens. A sign beside the kettle should guide the kettle. A sign near the flame should guide the flame. The painter divides the message, and both parts become clearer. He cuts a tiny companion tag for the flame note, drills it and paints it quickly, because its simplicity allows it. Keep flame low. Those words are not dramatic. They are the voice of experience speaking softly before trouble begins. The tag will hang from a nail near the stove, close enough for the worker adjusting heat to see it at the right moment. The larger kettle sign receives its main lettering after the ochre ground has dried enough to take black paint without bleeding. As the brush moves across the ochre board, the room seems to quiet around the act. Warm, slowly. Stir before use. The words suit not only tar, perhaps, but the whole day we have been keeping. Warm, slowly. Stir before use. Let materials loosen at their own pace. Do not force what will yield with patience. The painter may not make such comparisons aloud, yet the work offers them to us. Gently, the way repetitive labor sometimes opens a hidden door in the mind. He hangs the kettle sign before closing, because it must be in place for the next morning. The ochre color glows softly in the dim tar room, visible without shouting. He hangs the flame tag nearby, low and close to the stove fitting. Then he steps back. The two signs speak together from different places, each near the hand it means to guide. That is the final fitting of the day, and it feels complete without being final, because tomorrow will bring another awkward shelf, another damp board, another word needing a home. Evening returns with a clearer sky than yesterday. Through the window, a narrow strip of pale gold rests on the wet yardstones before fading. The painter cleans the brush used for black letters, working carefully because black left in a brush can gray the next pale coat. Oil, rag, press, turn, press again. The bristles recover. He sets the brush down and checks the companion tag one more time, ensuring it hangs freely and does not touch the warm pipe behind it. The shed smells of the whole day layered upon itself. Morning cold, midday coffee, sawdust, lampblack, wet brick, hemp, oil, and the steady dark sweetness of rope tar. You breathe it in slowly, and it no longer feels strange. It feels like a place that knows its purpose. The signs are not decorations within that purpose. They are little joints in its skeleton, helping the day stand upright. Without them, the yard would still work, but with more asking, more guessing, more small frictions in already tired hands. The painter closes the notebook after adding 2 final notes. Fine chord tags, holes farther in, passage sign lowered, reads well from both sides. These are modest records, but they carry forward what the day has taught. If another painter takes up the book someday, he may understand. If the same painter returns next season, he will not need to relearn everything through irritation. Written memory and painted memory support each other here, both serving the same quiet order. And as this second evening settles over the Lubeck rope tar yard, we remain with the drying rack, where old boards have become new tags and new signs have begun to look as if they have always belonged. The stove gives out a low heat. The lamp waits unlit a few minutes longer. Outside, the gate sign faces the damp air with its cream letters on black, while inside, the ochre kettle sign holds its soft warning near the place where tar will be warmed again. By the next grey morning, the ochre sign has taken the room's light into itself, and its black letters look calmer than they did when wet. You stand near the kettle while the first worker enters, rubbing sleep from one eye with the back of his wrist. He notices the sign because it is where his hand is about to move, not because it demands attention. Warm slowly, it tells him, and his hand follows the thought before he has fully woken. That is the useful softness of a fitted sign. The painter watches from the bench while pretending not to watch too closely. A worker should not feel observed every time he reads a new board. The proof must arrive naturally, in passing, under ordinary conditions, while someone is carrying a ladle or thinking of the next coil. The worker opens the stove draft only a little, glances at the smaller flame tag, and then turns toward the tar pot. The painter lowers his eyes to his own work, but you can sense the quiet satisfaction in the air between us. The tar begins the day stiff and heavy. In the pot, it sits with a dull surface, black-brown and reluctant, holding the cold of the night. Heat enters slowly from below. At first nothing visible happens, and that is where patience matters. A hurried worker might raise the flame too high and scorch the lower layer before the upper part has softened. But this morning the flame is kept low, and the tar loosens at its own pace, giving off a deeper pine smoke smell as it warms. You can hear the first slow stir. The wooden paddle moves through resistance, then pauses. A faint sucking sound rises as thicker tar releases from the sides of the pot. The worker waits, stirs again, and the motion becomes easier. Steam or vapor lifts gently, not in a rush, just a dark warmth joining the room's old scent. The ochre sign hangs nearby, already taking on the purpose it was made for. It does not make the tar warm faster. It helps the room remember how to wait. The painter turns to another set of blanks while the kettle work continues. These are for a shipment of rope, dressed for a smaller vessel, perhaps a coastal trader or a river craft moving goods between Baltic ports. The exact destination matters less to the painter than the handling instructions, but he still listens when the foreman mentions the order. Lubeck's harbor sends things outward and receives them back in altered condition. Rope goes to ships, ships go to weather. Weather returns in stories, repairs, and reordered supplies. The tags for this shipment need a mark that can be recognized quickly by men who do not read every word with equal ease. The painter chooses a simple diagonal stripe in dark red over a pale ground, a practical color mark paired with lettering. The red is not bright, because nothing stays bright for long near tar and rope dust. It is closer to dried brick, a color that belongs in Lubeck without calling attention to itself. He mixes it from a small tin, testing the shade on a scrap until it settles into usefulness. A color mark must be consistent. If one tag carries a narrow stripe and another a broad one, someone may wonder whether the difference means something. In a working yard, accidental variety becomes accidental language. The painter knows this and makes a little guide from scrapwood, holding it against each tag while he brushes the stripe. You see the red line appear again and again, same angle, same width, quiet as a repeated breath. The tags begin to belong to one another, a small family of signs for one journey. Once the stripes are dry enough, he adds the words: rope tar dressed, coastal order, south rack. The phrase is plain, but the stripe helps the eye find the group among other coils. These small visual systems grow from need, not theory. One mark for a destination, one shape for a mixture, one color for a handling state. The painter does not draw charts or write rules for every choice, yet he keeps them steady, because steadiness is what turns a mark into trust. A cart arrives near mid-morning with 2 empty barrels, and the new returned barrel sign receives its first test. The driver backs through the gate slowly, wheels sucking at the damp ground near the entry. He looks once toward the store door, then sees the black sign with cream letters and turns the cart toward the side rack, without calling for instruction. The barrels knock together gently when lifted down. The sign has saved one shouted question across the yard. No one comments, and the work continues more smoothly for it. The painter notices from the doorway, his brush paused above a tag. You stand beside him and feel the small pleasure of seeing an object find its use. A sign on the bench is still a promise. A sign in the yard, read by a person who needed it, becomes part of the day's machinery. Not a machine of iron gears, but a human machine of glance, memory, step, and hand. The driver leaves the barrels where they belong and wipes his palms on his coat before climbing back to his seat. After the cart leaves, the painter walks to the returned barrel rack to inspect the sign's placement in working light. The cream letters hold well against the dark ground. Rain from the night has left a few beads on the sloped top, but none have gathered along the lower edge. He runs a fingertip beneath the sign, checking for drips that might stain the wall or soften the board. There are none. The sign is beginning its weathering well, which is all one can ask at the start. The empty barrels smell different from full ones, less rich, more sour, with the ghost of tar clinging to wood that has been scraped but not truly cleaned. Their hoops are scratched from travel, and one has a chalk mark from another yard. The painter studies that chalk mark for a moment, not because he must, but because marks interest him. Someone else, in another place, made a quick temporary sign with chalk on curved wood. Rain blurred it, handling broke it, yet for a while it must have guided someone's work. He returns to the shed and makes a note to prepare a few reusable hanging plaques for empty barrels. Chalk is fast, but it fades. A reusable plaque could be tied on and removed when the barrel is cleaned. The idea is small, born from watching 2 barrels arrive in wet weather. This is how the job keeps changing. The painter's trade is not frozen in a quaint past. It adjusts each day to the behavior of wood, weather, men, and materials moving through Lubeck's working yards. By noon, the tar in the kettle has reached the right looseness. The worker stirs in a slow circle, and the paddle lifts with a glossy string trailing from it before the tar falls back into the pot. The smell fills the room with warm resin and smoke, stronger than coffee, stronger than damp wool. It catches in the throat if you stand too close, so you step back toward the bench. The ochre sign remains near the kettle, its surface now faintly dulled by the room's vapor, as if the day has touched it once and made it official. Rope dressing begins in a covered area where the air can move. The rope is not a single dramatic cable, but lengths of working cordage needing preservation before storage or shipping. Workers draw the warmed tar along the fibers with brushes and cloths, pressing it in without drowning the rope. Too much tar makes rope heavy and messy. Too little leaves it poorly protected. The right amount darkens the surface, brings out the twist, and gives the rope a supple, smoky sheen. You watch hands turn the length, dress, wipe, and hang. The painter is not doing that work today, but his signs surround it. Tags wait to identify the dressed coils. The passage sign reminds workers to lift them to the upper rail. The kettle sign keeps the warming slow. The returned barrel sign keeps the yard from cluttering. His labor does not command the process, yet it helps the process hold its shape. This is a humble kind of involvement, and perhaps many quiet jobs are like that. They do not stand at the center, but they keep the center from fraying. As the dressed rope is hung, the air grows rich with warm tar and hemp. The fibers have a dry green-brown smell beneath the resin, earthy and a little dusty. When tar enters them, the scent deepens, as if forest smoke has been folded into rope. Drops fall onto the prepared boards below, making small dark spots that will be scraped later. Workers move steadily, speaking only when needed. You hear the rope creak under its own weight as it is lifted to the rail, and the new passage sign sits just above the motion, readable and calm. The painter brings the red-striped tags once they are dry enough to travel. He does not tie them immediately to wet rope, because fresh dressing would stain the faces. Instead, they hang nearby on a peg, waiting until the coils have settled. That waiting peg becomes a temporary sign in itself, a place between process and storage. The painter labels it with chalk for the moment, then considers whether a small board would serve better. Not everything needs permanence, but repeated temporary marks often reveal a permanent need. This is one of the habits you begin to learn with him. Look for the repeated inconvenience. Look for the place where someone writes the same chalk word every week, or asks the same question across the yard, or moves the same misplaced barrel out of the way. That is where a sign belongs. Not every wall needs one. Too many signs make a room noisy, and noisy rooms teach the eye to ignore. The painter's restraint is as useful as his lettering. When the rope has cooled and the dressing has set enough to handle, the tags are tied on. Each red stripe turns outward. Each loop is checked so the tag hangs flat against the coil without being swallowed by the turns. The painter shows a younger worker how to twist the loop before knotting so the face presents itself naturally. The lesson takes only a moment, but it will matter each time the worker ties another tag. A sign can be well made and badly attached. Use completes making. The coils are carried to the south rack. They leave faint marks on gloved hands, and the smell follows them like a low cloud. On the rack, the red striped tags help distinguish the coastal order from other dressed rope. The foreman glances once and nods. Again, no ceremony. A good mark reduces thought at the point where thought is already occupied. The worker stacking coils can think about weight and balance, while the stripe quietly holds the category. That is the division of labor at the scale of a few inches of painted wood. Afternoon brings a drier wind from the water, and the shed door is left open wider. The air clears a little. Dust moves in the slant of light, then vanishes when the light shifts. The painter takes advantage of the drier air to prepare the reusable barrel plaques he imagined earlier. He selects small boards from yesterday's salvaged stock, trims them to a half-oval shape, and drills 2 holes near the top. These will hang by cord from empty barrel rims or side hoops, depending on how the barrels stand. The phrase is simple: empty. Scrape before filling. It may seem obvious, but obvious things often need signs because busy hands move faster than careful memory. A barrel with residue can spoil a new mixture or confuse stock. The sign does not accuse anyone of forgetfulness. It simply places the right thought where the eye falls. The painter paints the words on both sides, because a hanging plaque may turn. That doubles the work, but prevents the silent uselessness of a blank back facing the yard. Painting both sides requires a different sequence. One side must dry before the other can be safely handled, unless the plaque is suspended. The painter rigs a simple drying cord between 2 hooks and hangs the plaques from bent wire while painting them in place. They sway slightly when touched by the brush. You steady one by the edge, careful not to smear the wet letters. The motion is delicate and practical at once, like helping someone button a coat before they step into weather. The plaques turn slowly on their wires, catching light, showing words, then edges, then words again. They look almost like small pendulums measuring the afternoon. The painter paints the second side after the first has set enough, moving down the row with quiet attention. Empty, scrape before filling. Empty, scrape before filling. Repetition makes the phrase sink into the room. It will be read many times later, but it is already working on us now, marking the difference between what has been used and what is ready. A clerk brings in a printed label from a supplier, asking whether it can be pasted onto a board and varnished for durability. The label is neat, with fine type and a border more elegant than anything needed in the tar shed. The painter studies it under the window. Printed words have their own beauty, even here. They are even, quick to reproduce, and useful for trade. Yet the paper is thin, and the ink may run if damp reaches it. He suggests a small frame with a hinged cover, if the label must be preserved. This moment shows the changing world again. Hand-painted signs and printed labels are not enemies in the shed. They each serve where they serve. A printed label carries official names, suppliers, weights, and distant assurances. A painted sign tells the local hand where to place the barrel and how to warm the tar. The painter understands that both can belong if each is fitted to its purpose. He does not resent the printed page. He only knows that paper alone will not survive every wall in Lubeck's damp air. He mounts the label on a scrap backing with paste, smoothing it carefully from the center outward to avoid bubbles. The paste smells faintly sour, floury, and damp. He places the mounted label under a flat board with a weight on top while it dries. Later, he will varnish it lightly and set it in a frame. This is gentler work than lettering, but not easier. Paper wrinkles with too much moisture, tears with too much correction, and shows every impatient thumb. He handles it with a touch learned from boards, but adjusted for paper. The shed holds both roughness and delicacy now. Heavy barrels stand near the wall. Fine paper dries under weight. Tar warms in a pot. Thin tags swing from a cord. A plane rests with shavings curled at its mouth. The painter moves between these scales without changing his nature. That may be one reason the work is soothing to follow. It asks for steadiness across different materials, and steadiness has a sound, a smell, and a posture you can feel even before you name it. Later, when the mounted printed label has dried enough, the painter lifts the weight and checks for bubbles. One corner has lifted slightly. He dampens it with a careful brush, presses it again, and sets the weight back. No irritation crosses his face. Materials have their say. Work is often a conversation with things that do not speak, and the patient worker hears resistance as information. The lifted corner is not an insult. It is a request for more pressure, less paste, or more drying time. Toward the end of the afternoon, the yard receives a visitor from a chandlery, a shop that supplies ships with many practical necessities. He has come to ask about small signs for bins of tarred twine and marline, because customers keep mixing the sizes when the shop is busy. The painter listens while wiping his hands. The visitor describes shallow bins, a narrow counter, low light near the back wall, and customers who point rather than read. That last detail matters. Signs for customers must speak differently from signs for workers. For a chandlery, the signs may need larger letters and perhaps simple line marks showing thickness. The painter sketches 3 boards, each with a word and a painted line of matching width beneath it. Fine, medium, heavy. The line helps the eye and the finger. A customer can compare the mark to the cord without needing to understand all trade terms. The visitor smiles at that, because it answers a real problem. The painter notes the bin widths and promises the signs in a few days. Even this outside request returns us to rope tar. Tarred twine, marline, small cordage, all belong to the same world of fibers protected by resinous dressing and sold to people who need them to hold, bind, lash, and repair. The sign painter's reach extends from the tar shed to the shop counter, from worker habit to customer confusion. Everywhere, the job remains the same in spirit. Make the mark fit the place. Make the place easier to use. Let the hand find what the eye has understood. The visitor leaves with his coat collar turned against a renewed mist. The painter watches him cross the yard, then closes the door halfway. The room regains its enclosed warmth. He returns to the sketch and refines the lines for the chandlery signs. Not too graceful, not too crude. The painted thickness marks must be simple enough to repeat and robust enough not to fade into decoration. He tests them on scraps, 3 strokes in different widths, letting them dry while he finishes other tasks. We can see, by now, how the oddness in these signs is not whimsy. Each odd shape, stripe, notch, sloped top, double-sided plaque, and thickness mark comes from use. A sign that truly fits may look peculiar away from its lock. On the bench, the notched beam sign seemed strange. On the beam it became natural. In the chandlery, a painted line beneath a word may teach faster than a paragraph. The sign becomes intelligent by becoming local. Evening work begins with preparing boards for the chandlery. The painter chooses smoother wood than he would for the tar room, because customers will see these signs more closely. Yet he avoids anything too polished, because tarred cordage is still a working material, not a luxury. He cuts 3 equal boards and rounds their corners with a file. The file rasp sounds dry and steady. Fine dust falls in pale arcs. He blows lightly across the edge, then wipes it with his thumb. The boards will need a pale ground. He mixes a muted cream, similar to old sailcloth, and lays it on evenly. While it dries, he returns to the reusable barrel plaques and adds a small dark line around the edge of each. The line helps the shape stand out against dark barrels. It also protects the sense of the object, giving the eye a boundary. A border can be decorative, but here it is mostly practical. It tells the worker where the sign begins and ends in a room of similar browns and blacks. The border brush is narrow and a little worn. It does not hold much paint, so he refills often. You can feel the care required near the rounded edges. The hand must turn smoothly, with the wrist loosening at just the right moment. A sharp corner would be easier to rule, but these plaques are rounded for a reason. They hang better, chip less, and catch fewer sleeves. The painter accepts the harder brushwork because the better shape serves longer. This is one of the trades within the trade, choosing difficulty where it prevents future trouble. The plaques are left to dry overnight, and the cream boards for the chandlery receive their first letters before the light fails. Fine, medium, heavy. The words feel almost too simple after the longer yard instructions, but simplicity has its own discipline. The letters must share a family resemblance, and the spacing must make the set feel trustworthy. A customer who sees 3 signs should sense that they belong together and describe one ordered range. The painter's brush gives each word the same calm height, the same plain confidence. Below each word, he paints the thickness line. Fine receives a narrow stroke. Medium is wider. Heavy is broad and dark, with squared ends. He lets the line sit below the word, like an example laid on a counter. We can imagine a customer in the chandlery touching the sign with a gloved finger, then choosing the right tarred cord without calling the shopkeeper away from another task. A small painted line becomes a small act of service, and the shop becomes less confusing by one quiet degree. The painter sets the 3 boards side by side. In lamplight, they look orderly and still. The room smells of cream paint now, oilier and lighter than the tar. Outside, the yard is damp again, and the gate sign has darkened with mist. A rope maker passing the door glances in and says the passage sign has already stopped 2 coils from being placed on the lower rail. He says it casually, almost as a joke against old habits, but the painter hears the useful fact inside it. The sign is working. He makes no speech in response. He only nods and wipes the rim of the paint pot. Yet we can feel how such news enters the tired body like warmth. Not praise exactly, confirmation. The board was placed well. The words were clear. The height was right. The old irritation has begun to fade in a trade built from small corrections. That is enough to carry a person through the final cleaning of another day. The lamp is lit earlier tonight because the mist has thickened. Its light rests on the 3 chandlery signs, the drying barrel plaques, the notebook, and the painter's hands. He writes the date in spoken form in his own way, likely not as we would say it aloud, but we imagine the day marked in pencil as another working entry. He notes the chandlery order, the red striped tags delivered, and the empty barrel plaques drying. His handwriting leans slightly, letters practical and compressed, made for his own later reading. The day's closing routine begins again, familiar enough now to feel almost like a lullaby of objects. Brushes cleaned, pots covered, boards shifted apart, scraps sorted, shavings swept into a small pile. The painter inspects the floor near the kettle, where a few drops of tar fell during the morning warming. They have cooled into black flattened beads. He scrapes them with a putty knife, lifting them from the board before they gather dust and become permanent roughness underfoot. The cooled tar beads make a soft clicking sound when dropped into a scrap tin. They smell faintly when disturbed, a concentrated memory of the morning's warmth. The floor beneath them shows dark stains, but no raised spots now. A worker carrying a pot tomorrow will not catch a boot there. Again, the painter has removed a small future annoyance. It may not be in his formal duties, if such duties were ever written down, but shops survive because people do useful things that do not fit neatly into titles. He sweeps the bench with a hand brush. Sawdust, chalk dust, and tiny paint flakes collect in a line, then fall into the waste box. The brush has uneven bristles from long use. but it still serves. You hear the soft rasp across wood. The clean bench emerges slowly, with stains that will never leave, and fresh space for tomorrow. Cleaning does not erase the day. It organizes its remains. The marks stay, but the loose confusion is removed. Before leaving, the painter checks the paper label under its weight. This time, the corner lies flat. He leaves it pressed overnight anyway. Some tasks benefit from more time than the minimum. The varnish can wait until morning. The frame can wait too. The label's official printed beauty will survive better for being left alone now. And leaving alone is often harder than doing. The painter knows when to stop touching. That restraint is part of the same patience that warms tar slowly and lets paint cure. Night comes down over Lübeck with the mist still moving through the lanes. The painter locks the shed, crosses the yard, and pauses near the passage. The new sign is dim but visible from the doorway. It has already acquired a few faint specks of rope dust, softening its pale surface. This pleases rather than troubles him. A sign in a working place should not remain untouched too long. Use is how it becomes true. He leaves it there, carrying its instruction into the dark hours. The following morning opens colder. A thin frost edges some of the yard stones. Though damp keeps it from whitening everything, the air bites the fingertips. You feel it as soon as the shed door opens, a clean sharpness cutting through tar and smoke. Cold affects all the materials. Paint thickens in the pot. Twine feels stiffer. Wood seems less willing to take a nail. The painter works closer to the stove at first, not to make himself comfortable only, but to bring materials back into cooperation. He warms the cream paint for the chandlery signs by setting the closed pot near, not on the stove. Too much heat would skin it, or change its body. Gentle warmth is enough. He flexes his fingers, then sands the signs lightly where the first coat has raised the grain. The surface gives off a fine powder, barely visible. He wipes it away with a clean cloth and applies a second thin coat, improving the face without burying the wood. The signs become smoother, but still plainly wooden. While those dry, he turns to the printed supplier label. The paper is flat now. He trims the backing board so the label sits with an even margin, then brushes on varnish in careful strokes. Varnish has a different smell, sharp and clear, almost medicinal compared with tar's smoky sweetness. It catches the throat if used too freely. The painter opens the door a little for air, and cold slips in around his ankles. The varnished label shines wetly, making the printed letters seem darker and more formal. This label will not be hung near the heaviest tar work. It will go in a sheltered office or store corner, where it can be consulted rather than handled. The painter builds a shallow frame from thin strips, darkening them with oil, so they do not look raw beside the printed paper. He fits the label into the frame after the varnish has dried enough, then covers it with a thin protective sheet if one is available, or simply sets it behind a raised lip. The frame is modest, but it respects the paper's fragility. In this way, the painter becomes a mediator between kinds of knowledge. Printed knowledge arrives from outside, carrying official names and distant authority. Hand-painted knowledge arises inside the yard, carrying local habit and touch. The frame lets the printed label live in a rougher place than paper alone could manage. The painted signs let local practice speak with clarity. Neither form replaces the other. Together, they make the working world more legible, which is a gentle word for a very practical need. By mid-morning, the chandlery signs are ready for their finishing border. The painter uses a dark brown line, not black, because black would feel too heavy against the cream boards and small thickness marks. Brown suits tarred twine, wooden bins, and a shop where light comes through a front window but fades near the back. He paints the border with the same measured wrist he used on the barrel plaques. The corners curve softly. The signs look complete, but still humble. The visitor from the chandlery sends a boy to collect them in the afternoon. The boy arrives with cheeks red from cold and a cap pulled low. He looks around the shed with open curiosity, taking in the tar pots, the racks, the boards, and the painter's stained hands. The painter wraps the signs in brown paper with slips between them, so the surfaces do not rub. He explains which sign belongs to which bin and shows the boy the thickness marks. The boy nods solemnly, as if entrusted with a delicate instrument. Before the boy leaves, the painter adds a small note for the chandlery owner about hanging height. Eye level for a standing customer. Not too close to the counter edge, Keep the heavy sign near the right bin, if that is where the broad cord lies. These suggestions are part of the sign, in a way, though they are written separately. A well-made sign hung poorly becomes half useful. The boy tucks the note into his coat and carries the wrapped boards out into the cold light. The shed feels quieter after he goes. The painter returns to the bench and begins a different task, repainting the name of the rope tar store on a larger board that hangs above the inner door during busy seasons. This board has seen many years. Its edges are chipped, and 2 old nail holes no longer serve. The words are still readable, but faded in a way that makes the room look more tired than it is. The painter decides to renew rather than replace it, because the board is sound and belongs to the doorway. He removes it from its hooks and lays it flat. Dust has gathered along the top edge, thick and grey, smelling of rope fiber and old smoke. He wipes it away with a damp cloth, then a dry one. The old letters emerge more clearly for a moment, as if grateful to be seen. Their strokes are slightly uneven, perhaps from a younger version of the same painter, or perhaps from someone before him. He studies them with respect. Renewal should preserve the board's familiar character while making it useful again. He sands the surface lightly, enough to dull the old shine but not erase the letters completely. The old words remain as ghosts beneath the new coat, guiding placement. The painter mixes a dark ground close to the original, then lays it thinly across the board. The old letters vanish under wet paint. For a moment, the sign becomes only a dark plank. You may feel a small loss there, but it is temporary. Sometimes a familiar thing must pass through blankness before it can speak clearly again. While the ground dries, the painter prepares the lettering paint and sharpens his chalk. The store name must be larger than ordinary shelf signs. It marks a threshold. Workers entering should know where they are, and visitors should not wander into the wrong room. Yet the letters must remain workmanlike, not grand. This is a tar store, not a civic hall. The painter draws faint guidelines, then waits, because the ground is not ready. The waiting stretches, but we have learned to trust it. During that pause, he repairs a loose rack peg. The peg has wobbled for weeks, perhaps months. It holds tags and small hanging signs, and every time someone pulls from it, it shifts slightly. Today, with paint drying, the painter finally removes it, pares a sliver of wood, and wedges it tighter before tapping it back into place. The peg holds firm. Such tasks fill the natural gaps in sign work. Drying time becomes maintenance time. Maintenance becomes another kind of making. At last, the large board is ready. The painter takes the chalk and marks the letters lightly. Lübeck rope tar store, or perhaps the German words used by the yard. But for our listening, we keep the meaning clear. The name stretches across the board with calm authority. He begins painting from the left this time, because the old ghost letters guide the spacing well. Each stroke is broader than the small tags required. The brush has weight, and the paint follows in a thick, even line. Large letters engage the whole arm. The painter's shoulder moves, not just his wrist. He breathes with the strokes, leaning in, lifting, stepping along the bench. You can hear the brush travel, a wet whisper over the dark ground. The board slowly regains its voice. The store name reappears, clearer but still familiar, like a person speaking after clearing his throat. The painter does not over-decorate it. A slight thickening at the main strokes is enough to carry the letters in dim light. When finished, the board rests on supports near the stove. Though not too close, its wet letters shine. The room seems to know it has been renamed, or rather reminded of its name. You stand with the painter and look without touching. This is one of the more visible signs in the yard, and even so, its purpose remains simple. It tells people where they are. In a world of barrels, coils, mixtures, deliveries, orders, and changing weather, that simple statement can steady the mind. The afternoon fades around the drying store sign. Workers pass in and out, glancing at the board on the bench and recognizing it. One man says it looks like itself again. That is a fine phrase for a restoration. The painter nods, perhaps pleased by the exactness of it. The sign has not become new in a way that erases memory. It has become itself again. A fitted repair, like a fitted sign, honors the place it serves by changing only what needs changing. As cold evening gathers, the painter prepares to leave the large board drying overnight. It cannot be rehung too soon. Wet letters would smear under a careless thumb, and damp paint might stick to the hooks. He places a small temporary sign on the door instead, plain and smaller, naming the store until the old board returns. Even absence needs a sign sometimes. The temporary board looks modest, almost shy, but it prevents confusion during the night and early morning. It will serve briefly, then return to the stack. The lamp is lit, and the day folds into its closing pattern. But before the painter cleans fully, he makes one more small odd sign from scrap, no wider than 2 fingers and cut with a pointed end. It will be pushed into a narrow gap near the drying rack, where workers sometimes lean wet tags by mistake. The pointed end lets it sit in the crack without nails. The words are few, dry signs only. It is hardly a sign at all, more like a whisper placed where a repeated error begins. He paints it quickly but clearly, then he tests it in the gap. It fits. The pointed end grips just enough. The little sign stands at a slight angle, which makes it more visible from the bench. On a table, it would look odd and incomplete. In the gap, it looks clever in the most practical sense. You can feel the theme of these Lubeck rope tar signs returning softly, not as a lesson announced, but as a pattern the day keeps showing us. True fit makes oddness disappear. The painter cleans the brush used for the large letters with special care. Broad brushes hold paint deep inside, and a careless rinse leaves a dark heart that hardens by morning. He works oil through it slowly, pressing, wiping, pressing again, until the rag shows only a faint stain. His hands move with fatigue now, but not haste. The room has taught him that haste at closing becomes trouble at opening. Better to spend 2 more minutes tonight than curse a stiff brush in the cold dawn. The large store sign shines in the lamplight. The temporary door sign hangs in its place, doing humble substitute work. The pointed drying rack sign stands in its crack, absurdly small and entirely useful. The reusable empty barrel plaques hang from their cord, dry on one side and nearly dry on the other. The framed printed label waits under a cloth. The bench, far from being empty, holds several stages of usefulness at once. Some signs are being born, some are waiting, some are resting after renewal. Outside, Lubeck is dark again, and the yardstones have lost their shine to frost. The air beyond the door will be sharp enough to sting the nose. Inside, the stove keeps the signs safe from the deepest cold, and the painter lowers its fuel with care before leaving. Too much heat unattended is not wisdom. Too little, and the room will freeze around wet work. He adjusts the stove as he adjusts signs, finding the middle way through experience rather than calculation. We linger as he makes the final round. He touches nothing wet. He looks instead, trusting shine, spacing, and the memory of where each piece was placed. The door is latched, the lamp is lowered. The notebook is closed with a pencil tucked inside. For a moment, before darkness, the room shows all its shapes at once. Boards, barrels, brushes, racks, twine, signs, and the slow evidence of human attention. Then the flame goes out, and the work continues in stillness, drying through the cold hours, waiting for morning hands. Morning comes softly, but we do not need to follow every hand into it now. It is enough to know that the signs will be found where they were left, dry enough, clear enough, and fitted to the small needs waiting in the Lubeck rope tar shed. The large store-board will return to its hooks. The little pointed sign will stand by the rack. The barrel plaques will swing lightly when the first empty cask is moved. The painter will take up his brush again, because there is always another board, another damp corner, another word that needs a quiet place to rest. But for now, the room has entered that deep hour when even useful things seem to sleep. The tar has cooled in its pot. The twine hangs still from its peg. The knife lies clean on the bench, with its blade turned inward. The brushes keep their shape in the dark, waiting without impatience. Outside, the yard is pale with cold. A thin mist gathers near the stones, and the gate sign faces it calmly, shedding beads of water one at a time. In the passage, the long board is unreadable from far away, yet it remains in the right place, ready for the first worker who comes near enough to need it. The signs do not call out. They do not shine. They simply belong, and belonging is their whole quiet skill. So we let the shed settle around us. We let the smell of pine tar, oil, hemp, smoke, and old wood soften into one low memory. We let the painted words fade from sight while their shapes remain, fitted to barrel, beam, shelf, doorway, and hand. The city beyond the walls grows still, with its brick roofs dark against the night, and the river moving somewhere unseen. The lamp is out now, the bench is clear enough, the tools are where they belong, and so are you.